Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode of Russlandsfarerne. Today we're going to talk about yet another Finno-Ugric language, this time the Karelian language. Today's guest is an UN expert on indigenous people, and he's also a Karelian himself. Welcome to the show, Aleksey Tsykarev.
Hello, everyone.
Mm-hmm. And let us take it from the and also what how do you say hello or good day in Karelian?
Terve teille.
It's pretty much like Finnish, right? Or very similar.
Yes, there are many similarities between the Finnish and Karelian languages.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, but from the beginning, for those who doesn't know anything about who the Karelians are, like who are they, and tell us a little about who they are and their language.
So the Karelians are a Finno-Ugric people, one of the Finno-Ugric peoples currently living in northwest Russia and also in Finland and Tverskaya Oblast, Tverskaya Tver region, which is near Russian capital city Moscow. And for now, Karelians, we have about 65,000 people total in the country. And there are some estimates how many Karelians there are in Finland as well. It's like about different methodologies how to count, but so it's like from 5,000 to 25,000 Karelians in Finland. So and the language, of course, is also it's a distinct language, right? And it's spoken also those territories where Karelians live, but unfortunately, there is only 30% of all Karelians who can still speak the language, and that's why the language is considered endangered language according to UNESCO.
Mm-hmm. And is there something done to prevent it from being extinct? Like, are there classes in schools, or is it taught at the universities?
Yeah, so the Karelian language is being taught in schools, in the university as well. Though, so I'm speaking about the Republic of Karelia now. It's not as well, as well used in Tverskaya region as it is in Karelia. And it is because the assimilation processes in Tverskaya Oblast have been much stronger than in the Republic of Karelia. While if we compare the numbers, for example, in the beginning of the last century, in Tverskaya region, there were more Karelians than in the current territory of the Republic of Karelia. So, but unfortunately, because of the uh, close location to the capital city and all these movements around, and as well as the status of the region, because the Republic has much stronger institutions to and the infrastructure to actually take care of domestic language, but Tverskaya Oblast is not a republic, so they do not have a strong identity, and that's why the local legislators probably did not prioritize the issue of support for the Karelian language. So that's somewhat unfortunate, of course, and that's why coming back to the question. So we have schools, we have even some preschool education in the language, or some use of Karelian language in the preschool education, because unfortunately there is just one place in the whole republic where we have a full-fledged language nest with 100% immersion in Karelian. It's in the village of Viljärvi, with Lozera, but all other preschool establishments only have some you know some usage of the language, or they just use some words or learn some songs, some poetry. They learn how to play Karelian music instruments like kantele or johik or something like this, but it is not even close to what language nest is. In schools, we do have some schools in Petrozavodsk, in Petrovskoy, the capital of Karelia, and in national, so-called national districts, and places of traditional residence of Karelians. And in those schools, I mean, it varies, of course, a lot, but so in some schools we have pretty good Karelian, like lessons, where Karelian language is a subject, or is an object of education, right? But in some schools, unfortunately, there is no good system. Like, so in the elementary school, they can learn Karelian, but then go in upper levels of education towards high school. So the number of lessons is reducing, or is decreasing, actually. And in some places we see those facts that Karelian is taught as a as not as a lesson, but it's just beyond the normal program, so on a facultative basis somehow. Yes, and also it is also the fact that Karelian is not in any place, is not a language of instruction.
Because there's one thing that I've noticed about Karelia as a republic, because there are 22 republics in Russia, but Karelia is the only republic in which the native language is not an official language together with Russian, or at least on paper, because there's many republics where it is official on paper but not in practice. But Karelia is the only republic which has not a co-official language together with Russian. How is that?
Yes, unfortunately, this is true, and Karelians still struggle with this. So there are, it's like 30 years already when the Karelian movement has demanded that the Karelian language would be placed as a second official language here. But because of some political fears of different political parties or powers, so they so the language is still not official, and so the last attempt took place 4 years ago after the previous Karelian Congress, when all Karelians or Karelians representatives decided by consensus that we once again ask for the constitutional change. So because in the current constitution there is a provision that in order for the Karelian to become an official language here, there must be a referendum among all people living in this territory, and this is so Karelians consider this provision as discriminatory against Karelian language, because of course when we see the numbers, right, so it's 7% of Karelians only from total population, and all others they are Russians or other nationalities, other ethnicities here. So it is kind of difficult to ask all these people to vote for the Karelian as a second language and expect they would vote in favor. Also, given the some anti-Karelian argumentation, like we saw, like we participated in some debates with some political parties in the Karelian parliament, who said the Karelian is a threat for national security because it's too close to Finnish, and it would be difficult, since the region is so close to the border, so it would be it could become a problem. Not maybe now, but in some times. And also there have been some crazy ideas that if Karelian would become second official language, it would also raise some separatistic attempts or movements here, and I personally think so. These are just made up and do not have really a basis. So these ideas, and in fact, so if the prestige of the language would be increased by given or setting Karelian as a second official language here, there would be more. I mean, for all people who live in the Republic of Karelia, there will be only advantages from this, because I mean, by raising the status of the language, the status of the republic would also be higher, like in the whole Russian hierarchy, and the local identity would be also stronger, which is also in favor of all people. And another fear, which is more of practical, I think it's like how people actually think when they hear something like official language. So they would think everybody would need to learn it at schools, or also those like government officials, for example, who work for the government right now, or even like medical doctors and policemen and all this. So they also would think in order to become a policeman or a doctor or a government employee, so they would need to learn Karelian somehow. So this is not true. Karelians don't demand that. And what the Karelian movement is asking for is better representation of the language in the educational system, in the governance, in the media, and so the language would, take over those necessary spheres of usage where the language has given up because of some historical reasons and situations. So that's what we actually want, and we think it would be just very beneficial for not only Karelians but for everybody here.
Yeah, but let us talk a little about you, because you are a Karelian. But how have you been able to preserve the language?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that my Karelian, knowledge is not as strong as my Finnish, for example. So I can easily read in Karelian. I can easily understand what people say to me in Karelian. Well, actually, like even like both dialects, major dialects. North Karelian and South Karelian, the Livi dialect. I can understand Luri dialect as well, but when it comes to the speaking part, so that's not an easy task for me. So I'm still learning. I'm trying to to become a fluent speaker in this. But of course, the knowledge of Finnish helps me a lot in this task. So I grew up absolutely in absolutely Russian environment. So my parents, my dad is Karelian, but my mom is Russian, and my dad did not learn Karelian from his parents, and it's because my grandmother, for example, she told me that when she grew up, she was absolutely just she spoke just Karelian. She didn't speak Russian at all until she went to school, and then there was a very strong, movement towards kind of anti-Karelian propaganda in schools, and teachers said so kids should not speak Karelian in schools, in public places, and even in the families. So they just discouraged kids, including my grandmom, to speak the language, and that's why. So in my grandmother said like she was discouraged, but also many other people, the vast majority was also discouraged, and so they didn't want problems to create problems for their kids. So that's why they just didn't speak in families, with kids this language. So that's why my dad didn't learn, so he doesn't speak at all. And when I went to school, so I started learning Finnish because it was we had a lot of Finnish teachers in that school, and even the director was Ingrid Finn, I think, and many other teachers. And through that, so then I learned Finnish quite well. So I passed to the university, and again to continue with the Finnish language and to become a translator, for example. And then in parallel groups, so there were other students who studied Karelian, and then I started understanding that I'm also Karelian because of my roots, and started speaking with my grandmother more about all this. And I said like we should speak the language somehow. So because I didn't speak Karelian, so I said I would speak Finnish to you, so please reply in Karelian. And then we had these kind of conversations in Finnish Karelian languages, and then our some relatives who live in Finland, but they had moved to Finland in 1920s, and these two parts of the family lost. So and they reunited only in 80s when some travel to Finland was allowed already. So my grandmother and her sister went to Finland, so they kind of reestablished the relationships with that part of the family. And after Soviet Union collapsed, so this Finnish relatives started visiting us, and we started visiting them in Finland. So and this is how even also the language became an important part of this family relationships across the border. And also it helped me to understand our family's history, our history of the language, and the necessity of reviving it. And this is when I probably decided to participate and get myself involved in these processes.
Yes, and like there's many people that are curious, like because Finnish and Karelian are pretty similar languages, or like the closest of relatives, but what are some of the main differences? How do Karelian differ from the Finnish language spoken in Finland?
Right. So northern Karelian is pretty close to Finnish actually, and there are some differences in pronunciation of certain sounds, certain consonants, but the grammar is pretty pretty similar. And of course, I mean, since Karelian language is primarily being used on the territory of Russia, so there is a lot of Russian influence, and it is also interesting that the vocabulary, the development of the vocabulary is mostly based on the languages which are related to Karelian. So the term and vocabulary commission, which is a language commission, so-called, which operates under the as part of the governmental structure. So they use a lot of kindred languages vocabulary to kind of develop the new vocabulary for the Karelian language, but still also some facts and some phenomena, some issues are better. It's better to borrow from Russian, and some words already borrowed from Russian and introduced to the language. So yeah, but for the Livi and Ludi dialects, of course, there are many more differences, and it is not as easily, how to call, intelligible languages. So you cannot sometimes easily understand what Livi people say if you just speak Finnish, for example. It's better on writing probably, but not while speaking. And there are some like, I think, an additional case in Livi compared to Finnish.
Yeah. But like Karelians and the Finnish people can talk to each other in each other's languages.
Yes, I believe, and when we have our congresses of the Karelian people or other cultural events, for example, so we invite our Finnish brothers and sisters and organizations, Karelian organizations from Finland, for example, Karelian Sivistysseura, the Karelian Educational Society, and Karelian Kielen Seura, the Society of the Karelian Language. So our Finnish partners and guests, so they understand what is going on, and when they speak our Karelian, so they also understand, I think. And it's because also, like in Karelia, in the Republic of Karelia, we have 3 Finno-Ugric languages, namely Karelian, Vepsian, and Finnish, and all 3 are being somehow in the same package, right? So when we speak about any reform, like legislation reform or new measures to support the languages, so we always, consider them as a package of 3 very closely related languages, and that's why, I mean, even students who study Karelian or Finnish, Karelian or Vepsian, for example, so they also study Finnish at the same time. So that's why they become bilingual, trilingual, and they can easily use all these languages, and there is a lot of understanding among people speaking these languages.
Yes, and what's easy, but what would you say to those who might thinking of calling Karelian a dialect of Finnish? What do you have to say?
Yeah, I have some tolerance for those who misuse the terminology, because the terminology is not really very well established, as well as there are some differences in the linguistic schools in Russia and Finland. For example, in Finland, Karelian, Livi, and Ludi called as 3 separate languages, 3 distinct languages, while in Russia, in the Russian science, it is a consensus that these are the three dialects of the Karelian language, right? So these are not separate languages. But yes, I would say that of course Karelian is not a dialect of Finnish, and Karelians is a different people, and the languages have developed in different environments, different circumstances, and that's why I do not think we have any basis to actually call Karelian a dialect. And I think there was a problem at some point when first Karelian Wikipedia was created. So then somebody said and complained that this is not a language, this is a dialect of the Finnish language, and they closed down the whole Karelian Wikipedia, and which meant like all that huge work was just a waste of time for a group of people. And now, since the new Karelian Wikipedia is being developed for the last couple of years, I think it's nobody anymore says that Karelian is a dialect. I think it's nobody. Nobody kind of contests that. And I think we also like spend some time as a movement and as individual experts to educate our colleagues inside Russia and abroad about this language. I remember first time I came to UN in 2010, so nobody knew who Karelians are. Nobody knew even who Finno-Ugric people are. So people knew, Samis. Sami people is so well known, well established, organized, politically organized group whose representation at the UN is significant. And while they participate sometimes in the Finno-Ugric activities and movements, they, keep themselves a little bit distant from the Finno-Ugric movement, and it's because of course, they do not wanna associate themselves with Finland as a state who has suppressed Samis in certain historical times and so on. But anyhow, so when I came there to UN, I started, telling everybody I'm Karelian. We have own language, and so on. And now people, little by little, so they understand, they know. And when the International Year of Indigenous Languages was proclaimed, and we had like a lot of different activities, so I think that Karelian is now, everybody knows, like in UNESCO, in all these indigenous movements, so they understand that this is a separate, distinct language.
Yeah, and the last question, like, what is the future for the Karelian language, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's a difficult question, probably. So there is like a quite a pessimistic point of view on the global level about endangered languages in general. So the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, always reiterated that so one language is died out every second week, or something like this, and there is also a forecast that there will be by the end of this century 90% of all endangered languages will die out, and so on. But indigenous people, so they do not want their languages to die, or their languages even to be called dying or extinct or something. So they say better call our languages sleeping languages, or under-resourced languages. So I believe that Karelian language is really under-resourced at this time. And if we invest, because we still have, a lot of people who speak fluently this language. We have a lot of educated people with highest possible education, academic education. We have professors, we have teachers, we have teaching methods, textbooks. The vocabulary is developing. So it's not possible to say Karelian language is not modern enough, or it's not developed enough to serve as an official language, for example. So that's why we think that if we even more invest in the future of this language, it will have a future, because it can serve in every single domain. It can serve as a language of court proceedings. It can serve as a language of healthcare. It can serve as a language of science, right? And it serves already. So that's why I believe that if every Karelian would understand the importance of the transmission of the language to future generations, if everybody will support, not only Karelians, but also others, will support all these efforts, there will be a possibility to safeguard the language, to develop it and maintain. But right now, I think, because like we always say at all conferences, that we should preserve, maintain, develop, popularize, like everything together. But in fact, Karelian language is unfortunately endangered, and it's because kids do not speak anymore the language. So we have a lost generation. We have a very few families when the parents speak to kids this language. So that's why, since kids do not speak anymore, or they do not learn in a natural environment the language from their parents, so this kind of language is called endangered, and that's why we need to focus on revitalization, not maintenance, not preservation, anything else. Revitalization, which requires specific methodologies like language nests, which requires a lot of efforts. And then there will be future.
Yeah, let's certainly hope so. And once again, thanks. I think we have to call it a day. And thanks a lot for being here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
And how do you say goodbye in Karelian?
Hyvästi.
Hyvästi. Oh, it's just like in Finnish. That they also said it says hyvästi.
Yes.
Yeah, hyvästi. Okay, hyvästi.